Years ago, I found myself swimming in this sea of spiritual content on Instagram and wondering, what can I add to this conversation? At the time, this was 2019. I was doing spiritual coaching. I had just launched SWS. And one account that stood out to me as the type of spirituality or the brand of spirituality that felt the most authentic and grounded, although I myself wasn't quite there yet on my own journey, was at finding awareness. And then I got a little bit lost in the sauce of new age and manifesting 10K months in my coaching practice. Then I had like my own reckoning with that and feeling really disappointed in the conscious community, which led to my big rebrand. And so I stopped following most of the spiritual content creators that I used to follow and collaborate with over years. I distanced myself very much from the spiritual community online. So there's a very select few of spiritual accounts that I still follow and I enjoy. And one of them is Finding Awareness. So you can imagine that I'm pretty jazzed to have the creator of Finding Awareness, Amit Pagedar, as my guest today, especially because we're talking about one of my favorite topics of all time, spirituality, but more specifically, grounded spirituality, or how I prefer to call it, practical spirituality. It's spirituality that you can apply across the complexities of life because it doesn't promise a fast track to enlightenment. It doesn't bypass reality. It doesn't ask anything of you but your pure presence. And it especially doesn't ask you to join a cult. Which unfortunately is a rarity in the cold factory of Insta spirituality and New Age. So I brought Amit on to the podcast today to ask him, how did you do it? How did you stay cult free on your spiritual path? Seekers, you are in for a treat with this. Amit is such a beacon of wisdom and authenticity. He has built a wonderful community of sincere seekers online. So definitely look him up at Finding Awareness, which I'll link in the show notes. Amit is also the author of a book by the same name, Finding Awareness, which I'm reading right now and enjoying so much. It truly takes you on a journey into, finding awareness within yourself. I am so excited for you to hear this and receive these wholesome codes, or more like guideposts or a roadmap on how to stay cult-free on your spiritual journey. Let's begin. Welcome to Conscious Revolution, a podcast about political awakening. My name is Margaret Daftian, and I'm here to help you navigate a confusing world of misinformation, hidden agendas, AI, and cult dynamics. Because it's not enough to just evolve, we must also resist and challenge those destructive influences that distort our evolution. Get in, loser! We're starting a conscious revolution. Hello and welcome back to Conscious Revolution. I am joined today with one of my favorite creators in the spiritual online community who I have so much respect for in the way that he has been able to navigate this cultiverse of spirituality so gracefully, with so much poise during all of the bubble bursting with New Age spirituality. So as we know, spirituality or social media is a cult factory for all kinds of scammers. I talk about that all the time, how these fake gurus just take advantage of people by spreading a lot of toxic messages, that they promise spiritual attainment, but really they just lead people into darkness. And I myself have been like distancing myself from creating spiritual content. And I did a pivot on that because it's really hard to walk that fine line of making Instagrammable content that is precise, or rather pithy and shareable, and then also cover a lot of these inherently esoteric ideas and concepts without encouraging bypassing and sort of aggrandizing the spiritual ego. It's very, very hard. And my guest, Amit, he does it, in my opinion, he does it beautifully. And it's no wonder that, so many people do resonate with his teachings and share his words, because to me, it's very palpable when a spiritual teacher has truly embodied the teachings and they're coming from a more wholesome and integrated place. And integrated spirituality for me is like one of my biggest passions in my life. I really miss nerding out on spirituality with like-minded seekers. And so it's a really special treat for me to have you on the show today, Amit. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And one of the reasons why I accepted to be here is because I resonate with your work as well. I think it is extremely important to question everything we see online when it comes to spiritual ideas. And one of the things which I like to tell my audience is I am not looking for your trust. That's the first thing I say when I work with somebody personally. I am actually looking for your doubt. I want you to doubt me. I want you to question everything that I say. Take everything I say with a pinch of salt or a grain of salt or whatever you want to call it, but question it, because we are caught up in this culture of trusting, believing people. And, we are all going through various stages of pain, healing, trauma because of various things that happen in our lives. And it is in these vulnerable moments that a spiritual teacher or a guru or whoever presents themselves, right? And say, I have the goods, I have the solutions to what you're looking for, and we are all ears. We get absorbed into their ideas. And if we are not questioning, if we are not vigilant, then we can easily be pulled down the wrong track.
Yes, and we're gonna dive pretty deep into a lot of what you just said. I want to set a little bit of context for the listeners, just in terms of how we arrived here together today, talking about this topic, how to stay grounded and cult free in your spiritual path. And I couldn't think of someone more fitting to discuss this with, because there was a point around 2019. I think this is when I first connected with you, and it was through a mutual, we can call them a colleague. I reshared this person's post and I did some lives with them, and so did you. And so through this person, I was introduced to your work, and we were all sort of teaching non-duality. We were all nerding out on non-dual wisdoms. And then at some point, there was this pivot that happened. I think it was like around 2020. BLM happened, COVID happened, a lot of cultural shifts were happening, and things started getting very, very culty online. And I mean, it's like a separate conversation about why that period, but this shift happened in how spirituality was misleading people, including our colleague. And it was really disheartening to witness it happen to her and others as well in the industry. And spirituality was becoming so manufactured and so commodified, which it's nothing new. But I think that period of time, and especially online, really brought it to surface. And I tried to raise some awareness around it. I probably didn't do the best job at the time. I wasn't really prepared. So I got super burnt out. And then I ended up taking like a really big break from social media. And then when I came back and I rediscovered Amit, and you were still teaching these beautiful, wholesome, non-dual teachings. And I was like, oh, thank God. Thank God that he didn't get sucked into what I've identified as the money cult, and to describe a lot of like the spiritual materialism that happens. And then I reached out to you, and we kind of shared that disheartening experience of watching people get trapped, get lost on this path, and lose their way. And so I want to just acknowledge that you're one of the few teachers in my space that has kept their integrity throughout it all. Because even I got lost at some point. Besides my cult indoctrination, I definitely reached the point where I was like really fixated on those 10K months and growing my online following. And I remember feeling so out of integrity with all of that. At some point, I was like, it was really weighing on my soul because in my inner knowing, I just knew like, this is not right. This is not what it's about. And this is not the reality that I was after when I set out to help people. I wasn't thinking about money and followers, and not acting in alignment with that initial desire was really difficult for me. And I know that I'm not alone in that. And I'm bringing this up because other people have also expressed to me that, I work a lot with coaches and reforming the coaching industry, and people, coaches, teachers, anyone in the helping profession, when they pursue this work, they really go into it because they want to help people. And then at some point, we lose our way. And so the reason why I'm so inspired to have this conversation with you today is because I'd love for you to share your wisdom and your process with it, your experience with it, how you've been able to navigate these culty waters without losing your way and losing your integrity to your practice.
Sure. So, I think you bring up a good point is COVID, I think, was the trigger for all this in society, because this was a time when majority of the people lost their jobs or for whatever reason started looking for alternative means of income, and a lot of opportunistic people who had a certain amount of ability to describe spiritual concepts, let's just call it, or had read a few books on spirituality, realized that, hey, this is a great time to monetize this stuff. And they started posting stuff online, which sometimes is borrowed, sometimes is just copied from other people, sometimes heavily inspired by one particular person's ideas. And then you package it in a certain way, and you say that this is exclusive and this can only be offered to you or available to you if you pay me $10,000, no surprises. And that's how it begins. Is the opportunity is there, and you feel like you are in the right place at the right time. And if you don't grab it right now, then it's going to slip away. And then there is this urge of going out of your way to dupe people. And slowly this erosion begins, where you began with a certain idea of, hey, I want to share grief healing with somebody. I want to share this kind of healing, that kind of healing, because I lost somebody in my life. And all of these things slowly become transmuted into, hey, how can I make the most out of this? And how can I make a lot of money out of this? So, a part of the reason why I call whatever I do finding awareness is because if we have a healthy background or an understanding of self awareness, then we do not fall trapped to these easy avenues of making money. One of the things which I realized early on is, everything in life has a proportionate response to it. And specifically talk about this in terms of art, in terms of teaching, in terms of responding to the questions people ask, or in terms of responding to the problems in your own life. Everything has to have a proportional response. So if I'm offering something to an audience, whether it's a post or whether it's a book, whether it's a PDF, or whether it's a course, or whether it's some kind of education, it has to be priced proportionally. It has to be approached in a way which is appropriate. And this notion of appropriateness is lost immediately because we live in a place where, hey, scarcity drives the price up. So people look at the price and realize, hey, if the price is high, then that means the demand must be high. Most of the time, when you're buying things for $3,000, $5,000 from these people, the demand is actually not there at all. The demand is non existent. They are creating the demand by positioning themselves as being extremely coveted or extremely rare in the world. And that's how they do it. It's called high ticket business. In my world, I call it fraud. No other way to put it. If you see something which is priced outlandishly, your gut instinct is correct. It is outlandishly priced, and it is priced in such a way that it is meant to trick you into believing that's what it costs. Whereas what it costs is probably somewhere in the hundreds, maybe $100, $200 max, if even that. So we have to approach this with a balanced mindset where we realize that every service has a certain price associated with it. Nothing is free. If what you're buying is free, then you are the product. Google.com is free. Instagram is free because you are the product. They are selling you to the advertisers. So nothing in the world which is of true value is actually coming for free. But what is the appropriate value is what we have to cultivate ourselves to understand. So if I'm a creator, what do I price my products at? Because if I appropriately price them, then I'm an authentic creator. If I'm a purchaser, then how do I judge the content that I'm about to purchase from somebody? And if I buy it at an appropriate price, where I'm getting what I paid for, then I am being in alignment with myself. If I overpay, then I'm out of alignment with myself. And I discover regret, I discover resentment, I anger even, because I get pulled into a certain thing which doesn't benefit me any particular way whatsoever. So to me, it is having a strong sense of awareness, which creates a strong sense of integrity, which creates a strong sense of morality. And then it is really finding that fine balance, finding the way you want to do this, because you want to do this work, because this work wants to happen through you. I don't even want to call myself a spiritual teacher or a guide or whatever. I struggle to call myself anything. I just say that I love to talk about this stuff, and I'm going to keep talking about this because I was talking about this for many years before I started posting online. And I will continue doing this even if my Instagram account gets deleted. You happen to be here, I happen to be here, so let's share this journey. So I'm going to talk about these things, and that's why I say these are meditations on self awareness. I don't want to call myself anything. For a while, I struggled. I did have self awareness teacher reluctantly on my profile, but I've even done away with that. So use these things sparingly, use these words and labels applied to yourself very sparingly, because we do live in a world where we immediately start going down a track which is inauthentic if we are not vigilant even for a second. So every single day for me is, am I being my fully authentic self? Am I expressing myself fearlessly, correctly, the way that aligns with my values? And if I am selling anything, then am I selling it appropriately for what it costs? As long as these things are done, my voice remains intact, my integrity remains intact, and my work continues. So that's how I approach it.
I want to pull out the theme in there, the major running thread that we kept coming back to, which is what you mentioned, living in a world where we are, first of all, there's market and demand, and then secondly, there's that urge or that drive to participate in this marketplace, in this spiritual marketplace. And for me, that theme is spiritual materialism. And this is something that I've been referring to again and again. And I've done podcasts on it, and we've talked about it as well. And spiritual materialism is not just describing the capitalist and consumerist spirituality, but it's also materialism in what you mentioned, identity, identifying with these labels of teacher and guru, and then the way that the spiritual ego sort of uses that to hijack our spiritual practice. And this is such a subtle form of how this happens.
Mhm.
And I think this theme of spiritual materialism is so central to
Yeah.
New Age spirituality, which is why you and I have both critiqued it in our work. So just to give people an idea, like the spiritual ego I mentioned that operates from this materialistic place, it sees the world through the lens of hierarchy. It uses our spiritual practice to just establish its sense of superiority and entitlement. I was about to say enlightenment, but no, entitlement, not enlightenment. So it's really hard to stay grounded when the spiritual ego is in the driver's seat. And I know a lot of people struggle with that. So I'd love to unpack that a little bit and know just your process in the spiritual ego coming up. Have you fallen into the trap of the spiritual ego? If so, how did you get out of it? If not, how did you avoid it?
So I believe that I haven't fallen into that trap because when I was understanding these things and reading about, just understanding myself, I went through a severe breakup and health crisis, and after which this process basically started, where I had to understand myself and rediscover my relationship to the world. And I was mainly reading three authors, essentially, I would say. Alan Watts was one of them, Eckhart Tolle was another, and the third was Krishnamurti. Jiddu Krishnamurti is one of these fellows who was extremely critical of these things even back in the day in mid 90s, from early 90s to late 90s when he passed away. And his work is centered around all of this. So when I was reading his books, the foundation was already created to not fall into these traps and to be very vigilant about authority, especially if it is claimed by somebody who is not belonging to the scientific world. Because authority is also a tricky thing. There is an imbalanced relationship to even authority we have in society. For example, we mistrust the authority of the scientist or the doctor who knows far more about medicine or science or how it is done. And we trust the authority of the priest or the guru or the teacher who do not have any rigorous process to establish whatever claims or conclusions they're arriving at. So we have a misdirected or a wrong relationship with authority where we give authority to the wrong people and we don't give authority to the right people. So understanding what authority actually is very important in all of this. And recognizing that anything when it comes to spiritual matters is not science. We'll be very clear about it. And that whatever we are doing, we are building mental models, non duality or enlightenment or whatever concept you talk about. These are all mental models about how the world works and how my world works. And I'm going to talk about how my world works. And when you resonate with that, or if you don't resonate with that, you begin to understand how your world works. So you have to be very careful about the fact that when you declare something, you don't declare it as if it applies to everybody in every situation, in every form of social situation, whatever condition they find themselves in. It may not apply to everybody at every time, but it applies to me at the moment. So we build these mental models, we reform these mental models, and we live our life according to these mental models. So that's how I look at spirituality, where I am creating a mental model for myself, and I'm going to talk about how reality is best reflected by this mental model I have. If you see reality being reflected by my mental model, you are going to buy into it, which is fine. But a critical component of my mental model is doubting, questioning, using rational thinking and inquiry, self inquiry, to improve the model all the time. So, spiritual ego comes into place where you begin to believe that you know something that other people don't, and that there is a certain righteousness that comes with your own ideas. And that my ideas, now when I feel righteous about my ideas, my identity becomes attached to my ideas. So when my identity is attached to them, now I have to defend my ideas in order to be right, in order to survive. Identification is something very simple for anyone who is listening. For example, if I have a cup, I'm holding a cup in my hand. It's a beautiful cup. Just got it from Yellowstone National Park. But if I love this cup too much, and if I get
I love
attached to it,
Yellowstone.
then what happens is I have to protect the cup in order to feel safe and secure because I've become identified with it. If I'm identified with my car, somebody putting a ding on my car makes me really mad. If I'm identified with my house, someone saying your house is dirty or ugly upsets me. If I'm identified with my looks, if I'm identified with this or that, you can extend it as much as you want. So, identification is a critical part of the ego. My spiritual wisdom can also become a source of my identification. Then I must protect my spiritual identity from others, and so on. So, we have to be watchful of all of this. And our goal is never to identify, never to become stagnant, because if I'm identified, then I must protect it, and the protection becomes a form of suffering because I'm already always under assault from the world. So, my dedication is towards understanding my own truth, understanding what is real in my life, and examining it carefully within the bounds of I am also open to learning. Just because I'm questioning everything and I believe my own truth doesn't mean I don't learn from others. I want to learn from others, but at the same time, I decide what is right or wrong based on a balanced sense of understanding and morality I develop through my self awareness. So everything goes into it. The whole circle of life goes into it. Self awareness, morality, integrity, understanding, kindness, compassion, ego, everything is involved. And if you have everything, then you have a deeper insight into the nature of things, deeper insight into the way the world works, and you do not deviate from this path. I have seen several spiritual teachers deviate from this path. One of my favorite teachers has actually totally deviated from the path, who I mentioned earlier, Eckhart Tolle. And I see ads from his group, I see him trying to create coaches based in his lineage, which is completely antithetical to what his original teachings were. And they have become totally commoditized or commercialized, because the goal of a spiritual teacher is not to generate or procreate other spiritual teachers. Your job is to not create a pyramid scheme of spiritual teachers. That's not the whole point at all. It is to create individuals who are fully aligned with their own true nature. So if you are a real teacher, then your goal is to make somebody an actor if their true nature is to be an actor, to create a singer if their true nature is to be a singer, to create a martial artist if their true nature is to be a martial artist, and so on. It is not to create this cookie cutter version of spiritual guru where everybody is trained or coached under somebody, has somebody's lineage, somebody's certification. Jack Confield also does this. Various decent spiritual teachers do this, give out certifications under their lineage, which is a disgusting practice as far as I'm concerned. It diminishes or really takes away the value of what this work is about, and it makes the world a really cheap place to be in. So I don't align myself with all that. And I have nothing against individuals, by the way. Just because I criticize human beings, their ideas or beliefs, doesn't mean I don't love people, because I criticize their beliefs, criticize their actions. And actions and beliefs and ideas are not necessarily people unless those people are identified with their ideas and beliefs. So if Eckhart Tolle gets offended by the fact that I criticize him, that means he is attached to his image or whatever it is. I'm criticizing his actions. I'm not criticizing the human being. The human being is perfectly fine. So I would just add that in there.
So many great talking points in there. Oh, I feel like we could talk for hours about this. The thing that really stood out to me just off the bat was separating the teacher from the teaching, which has to do with your own identification with the teaching. So before we get too lost in there, I want to talk about the two sides kind of the same coin that you mentioned, which is one of them, the warning signs, some of the red flags that our own superego is perhaps, sorry, not superego, spiritual ego, even though the superego also has a spiritual superego component. But the fact that our spiritual ego is in the driver's seat. So some red flags about that. And then on the other side of that coin is how to determine or discern whether or not a teacher, a spiritual teacher, is also trapped in the spiritual ego. So I wanted to maybe just give out some tips or some warning signs that you've seen in your own practice. One of the big ones that you mentioned is this thinking that you have discovered something. You were talking about claiming authority, claiming expertise on something, and then becoming so identified with that you think that you know something that others don't. And psychologists have identified this as the I'm enlightened and you're not syndrome. That is actually research. The research shows that people who engage in these spiritual practices are more prone to having this I'm enlightened and you're not syndrome. And what you mentioned underneath that is this form of becoming so identified and so protective of your spiritual practice that you feel that it's the I'm enlightened and you're not syndrome is more of like an ego defense mechanism of protection. So that's one of the big ones. So what else would you
Sure. There
say
are
that
many
you've
signs.
observed?
There are many signs. I'll start with an example. One of the most beautiful things related to this is when a spiritual teacher is criticized, they become defensive right away. That's the first thing. So if you see them answer a question, I've seen like the Sadhguru is one of the Indian output, I would say. India is very good at generating spiritual teachers, unfortunately, and most of them are fraud. One of the most popular teachers is Sadhguru. He's very good at explaining everything. But what you should really pay attention to is how he responds to questions that criticize him, how he diminishes the audience members, how he laughs at them, how he makes them a subject of joke, and he cracks jokes about them, about their appearance, about their ideas, and makes everybody laugh at them, attacks them personally. So watch all those things. So these are watch a spiritual teacher becoming triggered. If they are triggered,
Yeah.
publicly so, then it's a very, very good sign that they don't know what they're talking about, or they just discovered something that they don't know how to deal with. There's a beautiful
Yeah.
video you can see where Richard Dawkins is talking to Deepak Chopra very old video. Deepak was a part of a documentary which Richard Dawkins was doing about God and religion and etc. and all of this spiritual stuff. And he asks Deepak a very simple, straightforward question, and Deepak Chopra gets extremely animated and extremely triggered by it. And you can see his face becoming angry, and then he
I
accusing
have to see that.
accusing scientists of using quantum mechanics as a word, etc., for their own use. Quantum mechanics is a scientific word; it is not a spiritual word. So the second sign I would say is, first sign is being triggered. Second sign would be if they are using language adopted from science, from adopted from other places, then you have to become very careful about what they are talking about, which is non-verifiable facts, using that there is quantum healing, using that there is co-location or whatever they want to call it. The butterfly, you change one thing here and it changes something over there because of entangled particles or whatever. Using physics principles is a very good sign that you are a liar, you are a crook. I don't care who you are. You use a physics principle, you become a crook in my book, because there are millions and millions and millions of physics principles out there. Do you know how each and every one of them translates to spirituality? No. Do you know what gravity means? Inner world? No. Do you know what thermodynamics means? No. Do you know what entropy means? No. Then you should stop talking about physics. Okay? That's simple as that. So, this is why we have to be careful about these people. So, one is being triggered. Second is using scientific sounding language, which is complete nonsense when it comes to the inner world. The third sign I would say is they really discourage or they falter when you ask them follow up questions. That's the third sign. You should find somebody who is willing to answer questions in a rational manner without using words for which it is assumed that you should know meaning for. For example, I don't like to use any kind of flowery language when I talk about. Very careful about it. Never use the word enlightenment. Never use the word awakening. Never use the word, I don't know what you want to call it, but super consciousness or any of those things. And I'm not against anyone who uses those words, but I personally refuse to use those words because laced person from the street will not understand what that word means, which means now I'm suddenly claiming some authority. I'm saying, you need to buy into this. You need to believe I know what this word means so that you understand my responses to your questions. No, can you respond to my questions using ordinary language, using basic facts, using simple things which can easily be verified, or using the English language or whatever language you use to communicate in, which is plainly understandable, even if you did not have any spiritual background? That's another thing. How rational, how simple, how clear your descriptions of whatever ideas you choose are. So that would be another sign. There are various signs. So which ones did you go? Because they shouldn't be triggered. They shouldn't be using scientific language. They should be able to answer questions without using fancy words. So I would say these are some of the main signs I would look for. Another sign I
Yeah.
would look for is if they have services they offer which are exorbitantly highly priced, which is a very good sign that this is a money making scheme. This is not a helping people scheme.
Mhm.
If
And that it's a sign that they're perhaps indulging in spiritual materialism and caught
yes,
up in the money cult themselves.
selling products of various kind which have got nothing to do with selling merchandise, like
Hmm.
Sadhguru sells,
Hmm.
I don't know, some kind of soil or something. Like he is on this
Hmm.
mission to save soil or whatever, and you'll see him talk
Hmm.
about saving this earth soil. And on his website, if you go to his website, you will find him selling soil packets for $40 a pound or whatever, like some BS,
Hmm.
use this soil applied on your body and then you will get some minerals or whatever, some nonsensical thing like that. So these are the things which you can identify and say, hey,
Hmm.
this is somebody who is. Oh yeah, big sign I missed is what is their appearance like. We think that appearances doesn't matter, but appearance absolutely matters when it comes to a spiritual
Hmm.
teacher, because a spiritual teacher is
Hmm.
going to indicate a certain superiority, certain authority by the way they dress, shaving their heads, wearing orange robes, dressing a certain way so as to indicate spiritual knowledge, a spiritual authority,
Hmm.
long beards, etc., etc. You see anybody who is dressed unlike an ordinary person on the street, then you are looking at a scumbag. You're looking at somebody who is trying to dupe you into believing whatever they are believing in. And when I use these harsh words, That doesn't mean these people have no understanding. It's quite contrary. These people have a lot of understanding about some things, but what they do is because they understand one thing, they begin to become obsessed with a small amount of understanding they have about maybe some sorrow or maybe some anger or whatever, and they extend their understanding to everything. So, a fraudulent spiritual guru will mix good ideas with really shady ideas. So, you have to look out for that. Plausible sounding ideas which are mixed with completely bananas ideas. And so, like, water has consciousness, or water can do this, or trees can talk if you listen to them, or whatever, strange things which are mixed in with things such as everybody should have equal opportunity or whatever. They usually don't say that. They would say something opposite of that. They would usually align themselves with one political ideology, one religious ideology. Especially if you see Indian people, they would be extremely aligned with Hinduism. That's a sign. If you are aligned with Hinduism, or if you're aligned with a particular religion which has given birth to you, then you're identified. Then you are not free, which is what you're claiming to be. So all of these are signs. Find contradictions
Mm,
in their message, in their
mhm.
appearance, in their words. Look for mixed stuff in whatever they are saying. And you spot all these and
Yeah.
you realize very, very few people will stand the test. Very few people. Only a handful of people. But that's the bar we have to set.
Yeah, I wish more people understood that, when we critique this, it's not that we're saying let's just throw everything in the bin, all of it is trash. There is a grain of truth, but that's the tactic, that's
Hmm.
the strategy,
Hmm.
that's the, what is it called? The con game,
Yeah,
right? Is to
yeah.
take that grain of truth
If
and then to
if they
blow it
said
up.
A, yeah, if they said A and A seems to be so correct, how come they can
Yeah,
see B and B can be wrong? If A was correct, B has to be
right.
correct in some way. So if,
Yeah.
for example, Sadhguru, talks a lot of sensible things. Like he's a very
Yeah.
good teacher in terms of,
So did Osho.
yeah, or yeah, exactly. They talk a lot of sensible things. Like 90% of the things Sadhguru will talk about is very sensible. But the
Yeah.
2% of things, like he went on Joe Rogan, this is not even me. He went on Joe Rogan and said he invites aliens into people's bodies and he conducts experiments with alien life forms and does all kinds of things. And Joe Rogan was wide eyed and looking at him and what are you talking about? But he was obviously, he didn't want to insult Sadhguru, so he went along with it. But these are the kind of things. And so people listening to that might say, hey, 95% of Sadhguru's ideas make sense. But 2% of the time he talks about aliens. So that means the alien stuff should be real too, for instance. And I'm not making aliens as, I'm not going to talk about aliens. But it's an example of how they say outlandish things mixed with very reasonable sounding things. Like in the previous part of the podcast with Joe Rogan, he was talking about ecology and saving the earth and regeneration of the forests and doing things for conservation. Well, great. I'm all on board. Let's talk more about that. The research that he claims to come up with is wrong, by the way, even in that. But fine, I'm all for conservation, all for regeneration of the soil or whatever. But then you talk about aliens after that. So you cover the whole spectrum. You claim to know everything about everything, and that cannot do. So use your judgment when you listen to these people.
Yeah, the mention of buzzwords is really great. I mean, you didn't describe it as buzzwords, but the
Mhm.
words,
Exactly.
the
Buzzwords.
language that people use is just so important because it really is a method of like hijacking, right, the critical thinking part of your brain. So let's get back to that question that I asked before. And you mentioned that you learn from teachers, but you also are aware of that the fact that they're not always in alignment with their teaching. For example, with Eckhart Tolle, and I do critique him a lot. Do you separate the teacher from the teaching, and what is your process in that? Because I know a lot of people who are kind of coming out of the new age bubble and they are perhaps really identified, or maybe they don't even have to be identified, but they really feel an affinity towards this particular teacher or even a particular doctrine or practice, and then they realize that it's been abused or the teacher has been harmful or that doctrine does not really hold up to scrutiny, although there's parts of it that really, really help them and serve them at a certain point. And the impetus is to want to just throw it all away and throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I think there is a better way to navigate it. And I'd be curious to hear how you've been navigating that.
Sure. I would say The simplest way to go about it is to focus on what you are learning and how it applies to your life, and really focusing on the fundamental questions of your own life, and not focusing on the personality of the teacher, not focusing on their personal life, or not focusing on what they are doing or how they are successful or how they are failing. It's not really about the teacher. It just happens so that when you get good ideas from somebody, you begin to believe that person, rely on that person to give you more information. But therein lies the trap, where if you make them the source of your security, you're becoming attached to them. So the counter to that is always focusing on your life. In what I mean by that, I'll come to in a second, and making sure that I am putting everybody's feet to the fire. No matter who the teacher is, no matter what credentials they have or don't have, I'm going to put everyone's feet to the fire. I'm going to doubt everybody, because the teacher could be deluding you. Worst, they could be deluding themselves. Okay.
Mm.
A part of me says that when Sadhguru or anybody talks about meeting aliens, etc., they are not necessarily lying to you. They may be lying to themselves, though. They may be believing that they are having a certain experience, and then they are honestly telling you that experience. But what experience they are having may be completely incorrectly interpreted. So there are various levels, stages at which delusion can seep into the whole process. So the way to counter that is always asking, what is my reality? How does it apply to my reality? Which is, if I am having relationship problems, how can I improve my relationship? And verifying that your relationship is actually improving. If I am confused about what I should do with my life, finding my purpose, how is this helping me find my purpose? Okay, so if I'm focused on that, then I learn from everybody. Then I learn some ideas from this person, some ideas from that person, some ideas from somebody else, without becoming dependent on them, because I'm so focused on improving my own life. So focus on improving your own life. Focus on solving the actual problems in your own life. Watch your mental state, see if it is improving. Watch your habits, watch your conditioning, see if it is. If you have addictions, watch if the addictions are going away. If you have fears, watch if the fears are going away. And focus only on improving yourself, because that will bring a kind of humility, a kind of stability, a steadiness, where you are not obsessing over another person, but focused on yourself. And that is what is going to build your confidence when you understand the nuances of whatever they are teaching. Because no complete truth can be covered in anyone's teaching. It just doesn't happen. The reason why that is the case is every one of us, just to give an analogy, is, let's say we were all long ropes. Okay. The one end of the rope is the beginning of our life, and the other end of the rope is the end of our life. And each individual is a really long rope. And every rope is tangled in knots. So I have some traumatic incident, it creates a knot. I have a breakup, it creates another knot. I miss somebody in my life, that creates another thing. I fail in a business venture, it creates another knot. So your knots in your rope are very different from mine. Okay, very, very different. There are different locations, there are different sizes, intensities, etc. If I come to you and say, I'm going to teach you how to untangle the knots in your rope, but you got to follow my process, is it going to work? It's not. It's a very visual thing. It can't work. You have to undo your own conditioning in the same way that your conditioning was formed, which means you have to look in your own mind, do your own work on yourself by yourself. There is no therapist, there is no spiritual teacher, there is no guide. You are your own guide, you are your own teacher at the end of the day. So, how do you navigate that and understand that is extremely important. That takes away all forms of authority, that takes away all forms of dependence. So, tomorrow, if the teacher gets caught up in some sex scandal or whatever, you are not going to be depressed about it. If some teacher is caught up in financial fraud, goes to jail, you are going to do just fine, because you just took the teachings, you did not take the teacher along with that. And so that's how I do it, is focus on my own life and understand whether I am learning, and verifying whether I am learning every single day, improving my own self-understanding, undoing my own conditioning, working on myself. And that usually keeps things pretty grounded, pretty real. And it also, beautifully enough, it brings out your own character, it brings out your own personality. Whatever you love to do will start
Mhm.
showing itself through that.
Separate the teacher from the teaching is basically the way, and a big red flag that I want to just put language around is when a teacher does make the teaching about them, when there's a cult of personality and a lot of guru worship that we see, where people forget that where the teaching ends and the teacher begins. I think that is a really
I
big
would like to add
red
just
flag.
one caveat to that. Separate the teacher from the teaching if the teacher themselves do so. If the
Uh-huh.
teacher themselves are not doing so, then you got to take the teaching for what the teacher is. Understand? So if the
Yeah.
teacher is very identified with whatever they are saying, and they are saying complete, for example, if there is a teacher who is talking about mistreating women or endorsing policies that go against equal rights, for example, now you got to take the
Mm-hmm.
teacher with the teaching, because the teacher is identified with their own ideas, and whatever
Mm-hmm.
they are teaching is actually harming society. So then at that point you have to say, I cannot follow this teacher anymore because the teachings are harmful. But if the teacher is vocal about this fact that, hey, my teaching is separate, I am imperfect. If the teacher keeps saying that, I am imperfect, I may be fallible, I make mistakes, I have made mistakes in my life, I don't know everything, I may have prejudices. Whatever I say, always take it with a pinch of salt. Whatever I say is always can always be wrong. I may be wrong, so doubt me. Then you can say, okay, yes, I can separate the teacher from the teaching because the teacher is not a part of the teaching. So we have to be careful even there, because a lot of teachers can come to you and say, hey, separate the teacher from the teaching. The scandal that I did, this person that I stepped over or whatever, that is me. But keep buying my books. That teaching is separate. I may be in jail, but you should keep buying my books. Let the movement continue in my stead. No, sir, you were identified with the movement that goes down with you. Okay, so we got to
Mm-hmm.
be
Mm-hmm.
careful in how everything we say will be misused by people who have bad intentions, and these teachers
Yeah.
for sure have bad intentions. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way that they're living their life.
Hmm.
The thing with Eckhart Tolle, as much as I critique him, I did hear him on a podcast recently, and it sounds like he lives, I mean, he has built this whole empire, right? But he lives his life, it sounds like this, that just like a normal, regular, well-adjusted citizen of the world. And I think that goes back to maybe the appearance factor that you mentioned earlier, not maybe not like literally their appearance, but also the appearance of their life and the kind of lifestyle that they lead. The last topic here that I wanted to shed some light on with your guidance is the prevalence of spiritual cults. As you know, I'm really passionate about raising awareness around the harm that spiritual cults do cause. And we did mention a few things that we can do. We mentioned discernment, we mentioned doubt, we mentioned self inquiry. But just to kind of tie a bow on it, I'd like to hear from you. What can people do to protect themselves and build immunity from
Yeah.
spiritual cults?
Very simple. It's very easy. There's just one thing you have to do. Okay, but this exercise you have to do in your own free time when you are meditating. That is, if you are listening to this, which is honestly, let some call a friend and make that friend say this, or say this to yourself, that my favorite spiritual teacher is an idiot. Say it to yourself. Very important to do it, because if that makes you angry, if that makes you feel uncomfortable, oh, I don't like that, I want to fight you, don't you ever say things about my teacher. See, that means you're a part of the cult. Very simple. If you can immediately switch to saying, ah, that's okay, it's your opinion. He is not perfect, I understand him, that he has given me some valuable things, but it doesn't make me angry. You are entitled to your own opinion, and you are supposed to have your own opinion. Maybe he doesn't align with you, and that's fine. But it helped me in my life, and I'm going to value his teaching, and that's about it. And you move on, then you're okay. Then you're well adjusted to your life, and you can follow that particular teacher, and you're not yet a part of a cult. A significant sign of a part of a cult is this strong attachment. Attachment creates fear, and fear creates anger. So if you are angry when you're criticized, then there is attachment. Then there is a little bit of cultishness that has seeped into your approach towards things. One of the things which we have to highlight when we talk about cults is also why cults are so powerful. Okay, which is, I have a go quickly into it. I have a friend who lost a big part of his family to an accident, like his parents and siblings and all that. and had nobody right from 7 years of age. And he started attending the meetings of, ISKCON, I think it is called, or Hare Krishna, Hare Rama Krishna, that's what it's called. So this is a Krishna consciousness group and born out of India. And for all practical purposes, it's a cult. But they worship Krishna and they worship his teachings and they follow certain practices, etc. But that belonging to this place gave him such a sense of security that no other social construct could give him, because he did not have any relationships. So this is also the role they play, which is this is a home for the abandoned. The cults are usually homes for people who do not have a home away from these places. So we have to keep this nuanced understanding in the background when we criticize cults, and we have to make sure that these people find a different source of security before we try to rip them away from the cults. Because if I rip this away from you and you have nothing else, then you are in trouble. And my goal is not to put somebody in a state of deep insecurity or deep crisis of identity when their identity was loosely hanging by a thread through the cult. So all of this goes into understanding this mentality.
Amit, this has been such a great conversation. I'd love to give our listeners, especially those who consider themselves spiritual seekers and they're on the spiritual path, or they have decided to dedicate, a certain time and energy to their spiritual quest, I would love to offer some words of encouragement for those who might be feeling a little bit lost or disillusioned with perhaps like a fallout that they've experienced with a particular teacher or a particular doctrine. Because I get this question a lot, and a lot of people I know, including myself, they get so disillusioned that I think on the other side of spirituality and the spiritual quest is nihilism, which is also dangerous and harmful for certain people. So I would like to just finish with just any words of encouragement for those who are struggling with trusting the spiritual path, especially, witnessing so much chaos and confusion and that's happening in the world right now. Anything you have to say?
All I would say is trust yourself, believe in yourself, and create a strong meditation practice. And what that meditation practice should contain, you decide. Don't let anyone else decide it. You decide. Make it quite simple if you have to, such as staring out of the window, just sitting by yourself without your phones or distractions. And that also is meditation. Something as simple as taking a long walk in the forest, that is meditation. And write after meditating, journal after meditation. I'm a big proponent of writing your thoughts after meditation, because once you have meditated, your mind is very calm, very clear. And when you start talking to yourself in that voice, you start spiraling upwards instead of spiraling downwards. When there is negative thoughts and negative talking, you know you're not good enough, you can't do this or that. Now it is possible. You can do this. You can approach this. You can think about this. You can allow your intuition to guide you. You can trust yourself. You can rise above your negative beliefs and work it out. Trust the power of rational thinking. Trust the power of self-inquiry. Take it step by step and work it out, because if you work it out, then you will understand. And once you understand, nobody else can take it away from you. And that alone is your own, which is what you have understood. Right now, any concept, any idea can be taken away from you if you have believed it, because somebody else can come up and give you evidence or proof or show you other ideas which are more powerful. But the things that you understand will become a source of your authenticity, your core personality, your core identity. And that identity, which is based on self-understanding, is never in conflict with the world, is never in friction with the world. You will understand the world, you will know when there are harmful elements in the world, and yet personally you will not be in conflict with them. So work it out, trust yourself, create a good meditation practice, journal.
Thank you very much, Amit.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you're subscribed to this podcast. And if you share it on social media, don't forget to tag me at Seek with Sarah. For my ebooks, courses, or to work with me one-on-one, visit my website, seekwithsarah.com. I appreciate you hanging out with me. Thanks for pressing play. See you next time.